is a huge honor today for me to be podcast interviewing Richard Engar, who is the president of the Pierre Fourier Academy. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, the technical title section chair for Utah, but yes, sir.
Section chair for Utah. You got a bachelor's from University of Texas in '76.
Oh, dear. Oh, you make me one of those Texans. I don't dare take that. I went to the University of Utah, sir.
Oh.
Utah.
Oh, U of T.
Or U of U. Somebody misled.
Oh, U of U. So University of Utah in '76 and University of Washington in 1980.
Correct.
General practice residence, Sinai Hospital, Detroit in '81.
Yes.
Private practice, general dentist in Salt Lake City. Faculty, University of Utah General Practice Residency Program from 1988 to present.
Yes.
CEO, here's why I really wanted to talk to you. CEO, Professional Insurance Exchange, Mutual Inc., 1991 to present. Fellow of the AGD in '87, Pierre Fourier Academy in 1990, ADI, ICD, ACD. Married, wife, professor, University of Utah, 3 children. How are you doing today?
Deprived because I'm sort of playing Mr. Mom. My son, who's a new anesthesiologist, and his wife are in the Big Island in Hawaii, and so I'm watching the grandkids who got me up before 7 today. So I had to feed them, get them off to school, and babysitter. I have real admiration for the younger practitioners who have to get kids off to school, many single parents. That's what I've been the last week. My wife is a professor at the university and has to be there really early, so I've had to take the load. But it's okay.
What is she a professor of?
Well, she teaches honors. Her degree is in English literature, so she's teaching a class that's one of your core classes for the Lib Ed requirements, sort of the history of thought and philosophy.
Right on.
She's like the top honors professor. She's sort of the face of the program, basically. So she's a big shot. I'm the peon. She's the big shot.
Well, you're a big shot in 2 ways. 2 things I really wanted to share with our listeners today is Utah is a very interesting state in the fact that most of the dentist malpractice insurance in Utah is all done locally in one Utah malpractice situation. Is that correct?
That's right. That's us, and we've been doing it since 1978, and Utah only.
And how many dentists are insured for malpractice?
Well, there's probably 2,500 licensed, but there's probably 16, counting oral surgeons, maybe 1,700. We don't insure oral surgeons, so that puts the pool that we could insure at about 1,600, and we insure right now about 1,300 of them.
So that is a business model that works. I mean, does that work where all the Utah dentists have their own malpractice dental insurance?
Well, yes, for a lot of reasons. Number one, we're cheapest, or should I say least expensive. And we do have an introductory rate for the new dentists who have the huge debt load, so that helps. And we're self-managed, self-owned. I don't have corporate overlords. We have a 9-dentist board of directors. That's it. We don't have any outside people telling us what to do. We don't have corporate jets. I'll fight cases. I've got 2 going to trial in a couple of months, which, generally costs us over $100,000 to do that. But my philosophy is I'd rather pay our lawyers who earn their money than these plaintiffs who don't. And so the system has worked, and basically, when new dentists come in, the first word from their colleagues is call P.I.E for your malpractice insurance.
Well, so, I know you're in a difficult situation because you're a dentist and your customers are dentists.
Yes.
But I trust you enough to be extremely objective. Do dentists who get sued, is it usually the dentist is doing something out of the line, over the top, and deserves it, or is it mostly crazy patients with crazy expectations? What is the balance of what you've seen for a couple decades? What gets a dentist in a trial? What makes a claim? Give us your long life lessons on how to avoid.
Sure. Well, the short answer is kind of all of the above. There's a lot of factors that go in. Obviously, you plunk an implant into the inferior alveolar canal, you're going to have a problem. Patient's going to be numb the rest of their life. You've got a problem. And our high-end cases usually involve oral surgery mishaps permanent paresthesias. The worst case we've ever had involved a dentist who did full mouth extractions without an informed consent. So the bottom line there is, if you're going to take out all the teeth in a patient's mouth, make darn sure they know what's happening and they're on board. Another issue that comes up is usually finances. Patient doesn't pay their bill, the dentist puts pressure on them, so they say, okay, I'm not paying you because you did lousy work, you committed malpractice, and so they try that tack. And a lot of it, too, is somebody gets over their head. In other words, you're involved in a restorative case or an endodontic case that you really shouldn't be starting, and patients don't like to pay for the same thing twice. So I guess the major issue is dentists really tackling procedures that they probably should refer out, not properly informing the patient, using informed consent, and then not handling the mishap or the problem correctly and creating hard feelings. Another thing that gets patients mad is feeling like they've been blown off or ignored. So I've got a little case going right now where a little 7-year-old girl had the corner of her mouth burned, I think by an electric handpiece that overheated. Well, right away the dentist said, look, we'll make this right. We'll cover the medical expenses. She's had some plastic surgery things done. We've got some potential other expenses to take care of. That case will be taken care of for like $5,000, where it could have become a $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 case if it had been handled improperly. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a JD, but I've been doing this for 25 years, so I sort of have a feel and experience. Another advantage we have is I'm right here full time, so if a dentist has a problem, he can call me and we can nip it in the bud, and that's why this model is good. When I retire in a few years, somebody else will take over and do the same thing I'm doing, and the chairman of our board, who's also a dentist, he can fill in for me. He's just retired, semi-retired. He can fill in for me so I'm not here. So one of the things that the model insists on really is having a local dentist who knows the local climate and the local dental community in-house to work with the claims. And then we have a great group of lawyers who are very experienced that are not, they're retained by me. They're in a firm, so we don't really have our own lawyer per se, but I've got a team of 3 in one firm and a team of 2 in another firm that we use. So we have experienced lawyers, and you don't need a JD DDS. I mean, I can fill them in with all the dentistry they need, and then they have all the law expertise that we need. So that's the reason it works. 2 reasons, I guess.
Do you think a lot of it is, okay, like you said, if you place an implant into an inferior alveolar nerve, you just messed up, and but do you think a lot of it is the dentist just won't give a refund, just won't make it right? They get cheap and chintzy, and then the patient feels like, well, the only recourse I'm going to get is I'm going to go get an attorney.
Well, that's a big part of it, absolutely. That and just staying on top of it. Endo, a lot of our problems that don't become claims, the dentist will call me and say, I did an endo and it's still hurting. The patient went to an endodontist, we missed the MB2 canal, or we were short, or we broke a file. So I just work out a deal where the dentist will refund the patient signs a release, meaning they agree that that's it, they're not going to take any further action, and it's over. So it's basically just a sort of a refereed or coached refund, and life goes on. And in some cases, we can keep the rapport good enough that the patient wants to stay with the practice. So in other words, we keep things from getting nasty, chippy, and keep the lawyers out of it. That I do a lot more of those. I probably do 100 to 200 of those situations a year, as opposed to having to open 6 to 12 claims where we have a notice that an attorney's involved and they're going to sue. So sure, absolutely. A lot of what you like to cover in Dentaltown and everything else, just keeping patients happy, doing the right thing, of course, using new technology properly. It's not quite the standard of care yet to do a cone beam study on all implant cases, but it's getting there.
The biggest listeners to these podcasts is under 30. So if these kids are getting out of school and you're talking to the a 30-year-old kid to 25 just got out of school, what advice would you give him to stay out of court, stay out of troubles, stay out of claims?
Well, part of it, and I see this in the residency program a lot, especially in endodontics, is I'm not sure how well the schools we're able to train young dentists, particularly in doing molars. So if their mentor, if a corporation or whoever they're working for is expecting them to do endo, then they should start conservatively and handle central incisors, lower bicuspids, and get proficient at the easy ones before they tackle the hard ones. And they should tell the person, assigning the cases, look, I don't want to tackle these till I'm ready to do them. I mean, in my GPR in Detroit, I got superb training in endodontics, and so it's very comfortable. That was a huge part of my practice. But some of these residents I see have never done a molar. They shouldn't be doing molars until they've been mentored and exercised, and otherwise just refer those out. And again, that's hard for these kids in debt because they want to try to do as much work as they can to cover their $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month loan payments. So the challenge is stay in your comfort zone, but at the same time take CE, do what you need to do to become proficient so these procedures are fun. To me, dentistry is not fun unless you're good at it. And then it's really fun. And it's rewarding, and you make patients happy. So I think realizing your limits and then also learning how to communicate, which for some of these young kids, put your phones down, put your texting away, and start talking to people. And I think education. Happy patients are educated patients. And with videos and this, that, and the other, there's a lot that can be done so patients know what's happening and they're happy about it.
And, the dentists, these young kids, they'll go numb up a patient, and then while it's soaking in, they'll go back in their private office and search on Facebook when they should be sitting there bonding. And like you said, if you call the patients at night and the patient feels like you care, they're far less likely to sue you.
Thank you, and that's really important too. Surgical procedures, any difficult procedures, that's a really good patient bonding tool to call them up and see how they're doing. It doesn't hurt, and they may be great, but on the other hand, if they're having a problem, you're right on top of it, and then, of course, documenting that phone call. If they can go and enter into their systems, great. If not, just write down what was said on a piece of paper and then put it in the records the next day, whether it's a digital or a paper record. Most offices, I think, nowadays are using digital, but there still are a few that use paper.
Now, when you do get a case, what percent of the time are the notes satisfactory and you're pleased with the note taking, and what percent of the time are you looking at the notes thinking, are you kidding me? You hardly wrote anything down.
Well, ironically, we have more problems in the digital systems where the offices don't realize that every piece of data is what I need. You have your progress notes, you have your treatment notes, you have your journal notes, and sometimes it's hard to make sure everything is put in whichever it should go properly. Templates are great, but they can also be poor. The one problem with templates is sometimes dentists get lazy and they just want to use the template and not put in some of the details, particularly if something doesn't go the way you expect it to. Let's say, you go a little deep, what kind of a base or whatever you're going to put in. It helps to document the exact brand of composite, because if you're getting failures, you want to know what's failing and why, and maybe switch to something. The amount of anesthetic, the type of anesthetic, simple things. A diagnosis, unfortunately, that's a thing a lot of lawyers like to harp on, is where's the diagnosis, and just keeping a good track of treatment plans, those sorts of things. And then prescriptions. Sometimes dentists are a little lax, and most of the programs now have a good area to record prescriptions, but some dentists don't do that properly. And the worst thing in a case is he said, she said. If we don't have the records to back up what the dentist says, then it's really difficult to defend. So I think the summary is just making sure the template says exactly what you want to say and not being afraid to add things to it, and identifying who made the entry. If an assistant makes the entry, make sure the initials or whatever are standardized, so 4 years later, everybody knows who the person is whose initials are written down there, typed in.
And you also mentioned the collection policy, that when people owe you money, they don't want to pay. A lot of times they'll go get an attorney. What percent of the cases do you think start off like that, where if the doctor just would have had a firm collection policy, they never would have been in court?
Well, interestingly, most of our meritorious cases, in other words, where the dentist goofed up, i.e. taking out the wrong tooth, plunking an implant into the canal, poor endo, perforations, that sort of thing, it really doesn't matter. But I'd say in these other matters we're dealing with, the root canal problems, probably at least a third to a half of them probably involve some collection element. And one of the biggest problems is an office will have policies in place and they don't follow them. They try to be too nice and let a patient get behind. Cosmetic procedures in particular can be a problem if you don't have the money collected up front, because it's easy for them to say, oh, this doesn't look good, so I'm not going to pay for it. We recommend that half be paid down before it even goes to the lab, and then the balance be paid at the front desk before the patient comes in. And if that's all spelled out ahead of time in writing, it's not abandonment to tell the patient, oh, you didn't bring your checkbook, we can't seat these. You can't do that unless you have a prior agreement, though. But, the problem with cosmetic procedures is they're not essential. I mean, the person won't die, they won't go to the hospital with an infection, whereas something like a root canal, if there's pain, people are highly motivated to do what they have to do to get the procedure done. They have to pay up front, they'll pay up front. That's one of the reasons I liked endo, is I did a lot of referrals. The people in my building and other dentists sent their cases to me, and I could say, okay, my policy is you have to pay for these right up front. So that worked out great. But you really hit the nail on the head. It creates bad feelings, and the office has to make sure that they stick with a policy, especially orthodontists. One of the biggest problems orthodontists have, again, is they have a contract, but then the patient will miss a few payments, and they don't get right on it till they're 6 months in arrears, and then what do you do? See? So it's just a matter, for the young dentists, I think the important thing is just making sure their accounts receivable stays current, and that the basic policy is pay as you go, and having patients to pay their copays in a timely manner. I think that's something you've talked about a lot. I've looked at in Dentaltown, and it's right on. Just staying on top of your financial. I mean, obviously, you can't pay your loans unless you're collecting the money.
So, is there any type of a profile of the average person who sues? Is it more likely to be man versus woman, or old versus young, or is there any red flags that a young dentist, when they're working on patients, should be thinking? I mean, I wouldn't think an old fat grandpa bald like me would sue on a cosmetic case. Is there any profiles that could help this kid think, I need to slow down, Spanky, because this might be?
Yes, I don't want to sound chauvinistic, but postmenopausal females that bring in pictures of them when they were 25 years old, or pictures of their favorite actress, and say, this is how I want to look. Those are tough. And they're very willing to pull the trigger and get mad and get a lawyer, and you can do everything you can to try to let them know ahead of time. I can't promise you that we're going to make it look like this and so forth. But in the olden days it used to be more middle-aged, but I'm seeing it across the board. I've got files with 25-year-old plaintiffs. I got a few 60-year-old plaintiffs. It's more across. Back in the day, it was mostly these postmenopausal females, period. A lot of them are people you need a good health history that are on anti-anxiety medication. Most of our plaintiffs are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. They just have a hard time dealing with stress. They have a hard time dealing with situations that don't turn out like they expect.
Is it more women than men?
Right now, yes. I mean, without pulling out my files, I would say yes, more women than men.
And red flags would be if they're on any type of brain medication, any type of anti-anxiety, antidepressant?
Correct. I think a lot of dentists aren't careful enough looking at the health history, and particularly if you're considering doing any kind of sedation on a patient, because you send them home, the narcotics you give them are going to be potentiated, and you can run into more problems, feeding more drugs into their systems. Yes.
So what are tell these kids, like, what are price range? What are like average settlement for average things? Like if you run an implant into a nerve, or if you pull the wrong tooth, what are some ballpark figure ranges?
Well, that's a fun question, and the answer is it depends on where you live. California, Washington, D.C., East Coast, Appalachia, in those areas, juries tend to award to people a lot higher. For example, I can settle cases. The paresthesia case, for example, I used to be able to settle those for $25,000, $30,000 in the 1990s, and it's gone up a little bit. but you can almost add a zero to the amounts I can settle cases for here in a place like California. For example, this wrongful extraction case, I have to keep everything confidential, but the lawyers tried to throw $1 million settlements and $1 million judgments at me that they found from cases in Appalachia, where people there kind of have the idea that it's lotto time. If you have a problem, you've got it made. Whereas this case I was able to settle for under $200,000, which would not have happened in California. I mean, there's a lot of factors involved, because what happens is the mediator is an independent party who gets reports from both sides and then tries to meet somewhere in the middle, and they get both of us mad. At the end, the plaintiff's mad because they didn't get enough money. I'm mad because I paid more than I wanted to, but the case is resolved. And very often that's better than a jury trial because there's less risks. The other thing is, I'm guaranteeing you losing your case if you alter your records. If you mess up your records, you're done, because nobody's going to believe you anymore, and that's the best way to foul things up in the event of a case. So whatever you do, don't think you can alter your records and succeed. It won't work. But
and it also can sometimes take it from a civil case to a criminal case. I saw that in Arizona, where somebody gave too much anesthetic to a child, and it was going to be a civil case, but since he altered the notes, then the state attorney general got in, and then on top of that, filed a criminal suit.
Sure, well, that's fraud, and you can get, as you say, it'll carry over into the state board, and then there's a criminal thing, and it's considered unprofessional conduct, and then you can be put on probation. And, of course, there you go. You're out of all the insurance panels, and it's hard to find work if you're, in a various corporate type situation and don't own your own practice or whatever. So absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head there.
So do you ever have a paying customer and they have a claim, and you as a business owner say, I'm sorry, Frank, but you can't do root canals anymore, or you can't place implants, or do you guys ever do that and say, we're not going to cover you if you do this? I know state boards can do that, correct?
Well,
state boards say
they can tell you you can't. We had a dentist, for example, who went before the Utah State Board because he was taking out second molars for orthodontics, and there was a track record of problems. The way we handle things is, let me just back up a little bit. Some companies have what's called a consent to settle option, where you pay a little extra premium. The company cannot settle a claim without your permission. We don't have that, but I have never settled a claim over the dentist's objections. The way we do it, sort of like the same communication with patients. We keep the dentist apprised of everything going on. If there's a problem, they know it. But what we will do is, if we have a meritorious claim, in other words, you've plunked an implant into the inferior alveolar canal and I have to settle it, say, for $40,000, then what we will do is surcharge the dentist a 10% of that amount. So they're paying $4,000 over and above the regular premium. So it's sort of like an auto insurance policy. You made a mistake, so to protect the pool, you're going to be penalized. So you better be careful and not do these. Better refer them. I don't specifically exclude them, but we can just say, better not do these anymore, because if you get a second meritorious claim, you're out. See, and that's how we do it. So it's like you've got a strike against you. So that's the deterrent. And the other thing, too, is if I tell somebody, you better be careful and not do these anymore, and they get a second one in, I'll just non-renew them. It's very, very rare that we've had to do that, but it's about every other year I have to throw somebody out because of a second meritorious claim. So that does happen, and it's unfortunate. It's hard to reject a colleague, but I've got to protect the pool. So we, if hospital privileges can limit that, but normally what the dentist learns, oh man, this wasn't worth all the time and trauma and trouble, plus they've got the surcharge, they've got this mark hanging over them, so they naturally don't want to do it without the ramifications and the consequences.
We talked about a profile of a patient. Is there a profile of a dentist? Is it usually young kids and they just don't have the experience? Or is it old guys who have been golfing too much and quit taking CE? Is there any profile to the dentist getting in trouble?
Yes, we did a study on that a few years ago, and it's the dentists who were 45 to 50 years old. And the reason is
Really?
Experienced, yes. The younger ones are generally more careful and more conservative. I'm like you. I thought, oh, it's going to be the younger ones. And in fact, in the olden days, our company charged more for the first 4 years because the thinking was, oh, these newer graduates are higher risk. We're going to have more problems with them. But that's not the case. The 45 to 50-year-olds, I think, are a little more brazen. They're more willing to take on new things. And maybe they're complacent, figure we don't need the CE anymore. You know, you're like me. I mean, we're both big on AGD because, you know, you're encouraged to take the minimum, 25 hours or whatever a year, 75, for the cycles for CE. And most states now, of course, have requirements for CE, and they'll audit 8 to 10% of the dentists, so you got to make sure you do it and keep your certificates. But, yeah, the older ones and less wiser, I guess, are the ones you got to watch out for.
We always hear standard of care being thrown about. What exactly is the standard of care? I mean, how do you define that? How do the judge and the jury, how do those guys define standard of care?
Well, there's basically three elements that are involved in a malpractice case. One is you have a duty to perform the procedure the way you were taught in dental school. Okay, there's basically one way to do it that's pretty standardized throughout the country, Canada, wherever. Now, the standard of care is a little more amorphous in that it can be variable. It basically is the expectation that normally should happen with treatment by a given dentist to a given patient and how the results should go. But for example, if this and they will try to argue that there's a national standard of care. For example, they will argue that when you do root canal therapy, it's the standard of care to use a rubber dam. Okay, so anytime you have a claim, if you don't use a rubber dam, they're going to get the plaintiffs are going to get an expert witness who's one of the dental school instructors you hated that's going to say you breached the standard of care because you did not practice using a rubber dam, so you're below this line that should be there. Well, let's say in Payson, Utah, there's 4 dentists and none of them use a rubber dam. Then I would get an expert witness who would say, well, the standard of care in Payson, Utah is not to use a rubber dam, it's to use other methods to isolate. So the interesting kind of dichotomy is there's a national standard of care that will try to be pushed, but you can argue that there's also a local standard of care. And our history and trial is my local experts have trumped these national guys every time. But that's not to say you need to be sloppy. Basically, if in doubt, you should practice the standards that you learned in school as far as things like rubber dams and documentation. For example, X-rays. Is it the standard of care to take a panoramic film every time you take out third molars versus P.I.Es? I'd have to say yes. I've had a few cases where all the dentist did was take P.I.Es, and I've had a hard time getting somebody who will testify under oath that, yes, you met the standard of care by taking these P.I.Es because you're missing anatomic structures. Same time, is it the standard of care now to take a cone beam every time you take out third molars? Not necessarily, because if you can see all the anatomy you need with a two-dimensional image, which isn't going to cost the patient as much, nor submit them to as much radiation, then you're fine. Another one, for example, is it the standard of care to use a rubber dam when you take x-rays on a pregnant patient? Well, I have dentists who told me they've taken courses where they said, oh, you don't need to use a lead apron. That's just kind of a myth. But the 16-year-old Medicaid patient who's been in your office who didn't have the lead apron and then goes to the Medicaid clinic, and they ask her, oh, you just went to the dentist. Did they use a lead apron to take the x-rays? Oh, no, they didn't do that. They're going to call and read you the Riot Act and tell the state to come after you because you did not practice the standard of care. So, see, that's the problem. There's a lot of variability in it, and that can be good and it can be bad. So there's a long answer for you.
And the lead apron is it's basically the thyroid. That's what everybody's concerned about, isn't it? It's the
thyroid and just, what I used to do, this sounds really funny. If I had a pregnant patient, I put 2 lead shields on them. One this way up to their neck and another one on the side, and they loved me. Oh, you're doing so much to protect my baby. So, it depends on what you read, but a lot of it, again, is patient expectations. Patients expect certain things, and that's part of standard of care. What do patients expect to have a good outcome?
Well, and I was wondering, what's your What's your patriotic experience with the American jury system? I mean, are juries usually normal and predictable, and they did a good job? Or what percent of the time do you just think, "Are you kidding me? This jury system is crazy"?
Well, knock on wood, we've had, I should have looked this up for you, probably about every other year. So, but we've had at least 12 in our history, 12 to 15 jury trials, and we've won every one with the exception of the one where the guy altered the records. But and it's interesting because the ruling is, it doesn't have to be unanimous. We've had a couple times where, there's an 8-jury panel, and 6 of the 8 voted no cause of action, and so that was it. But we've never, fortunately, had a case where we thought, man, these people were nuts. But a lot of it has to do with jury selection, and that's where you need really good lawyers. It's a complicated process, and the plaintiffs want the dumbest people on that panel that they can get. We want the college-educated. And, of course, truly, if you were judged by a jury of your peers, it would be 8 dentists, but that's never going to happen. But our experience has been good. And we've polled, our attorneys, we have their paralegals poll the jurors to get insights and help for the next time, and that usually helps with the preparation. That's where good law comes in. I mean, that's where you don't want somebody who was a great dentist and a terrible lawyer as a JD DDS. You want the best lawyers you can defending you who know the law. We can feed them. The expert witnesses can feed them the dental information. They need to know the law. They need to know how to make motions. They know what to exclude. I mean, it's really a game, Howard. The people that know the rules and know how to implement them the best are the ones that usually win. But we've had a positive experience with juries. I've also had a positive experience with mediations. The first few really got me mad because the mediator would get in my face and say, look, you've got a problem. You got to pay up. And I kind of think, how dare you tell me what to do? But the more I got into it, I mean, these mediators are usually lawyers who've had a lot of experience. And, we get too subjective. We get too close to the case and often need somebody shaking us up a little bit saying, no, you got this problem. And that's another thing in these cases. Sometimes the dentists are absolutely certain they're right, that they didn't do anything wrong and that they met the standard of care. But then when I have other people look at it, we get different insights, and I can sit down with them and go over x-rays and educate them as to, well, this is what went wrong. This is why this is below the standard of care. This is what you've got to do in the future. One of the things I really try to do is rehab and help these guys to avoid these problems down the road, and it's just like communicating with a patient. My job is to teach and educate and elevate the dentistry they're performing. And see, that's another advantage with our model. A lot of these other insurance companies, you're not working with a dentist, you're working with an adjuster. All they care about is the bottom line. They want to get out of it for as cheap as they can, and they don't care what happens to you down the road. See, that's the thing, where we're inbred dentists, and we're trying to make the profession look good, and the way we try to handle these cases usually make the profession look good. But if somebody tries to take advantage of me, and I think they're trying to get it right on the gravy train, we're going to be very tenacious and fight that plaintiff tooth and nail. Another thing I'll do is, we win in trial, I can get a cost judgment for certain expenses against the plaintiff, and I routinely do that. The last trial we had, I got $3,500 out of the patient. So he goes and tells his friends, man, don't try to sue a dentist. I ended up paying $3,500. The attorneys take a contingency. In most states, they get a third. So the patient doesn't lose anything unless I go after him. So that chills, because, people don't want to take the risk, and lawyers find out, man, this P.I.E, if you lose, they're going to go after you. See? So there's, it's not like England where loser pays the whole thing. But none of these people want to drop $1,000 or even 2 or 3. And I've had some legal firms make the payment so they don't get sued for malpractice. So that's one little thing we can do. And I'm not the only one. I mean, most companies have that prerogative. Whether or not they want to do it is up to their, various policies and things.
And what is P.I.E stand for? It's called P.I.E.
When I say P.I.E, I mean Professional Insurance Exchange. That's just our initiative.
And that's your website, P.I.E Utah.
Yeah, P.I.E at PIEutah.org.
So I want to ask you a philosophical question. We've both been in this profession a long time. Do you worry that, we've seen a lot of new dental schools add on. When you got out of dental school and I got out of dental school, when I came to Arizona, there were no dental schools. Now there's two. When you went to set up in your practice in Utah, there were no dental schools. Now you have two.
Correct.
So you have a lot more supply of dentists. They have a lot more debt. Does that make you worry that maybe our young colleagues are going to be trying to do things they can't do? Like, I should refer these wisdom teeth, but I need to pull them to pay for my big student loans. I don't want to do the smaller endo, but I got to, do you think that we're adding? Do you think Utah needed two dental schools? Did Arizona need two dental schools? And do you think if we just keep adding dental schools, I mean, there's another 5 or 6 being planned right now. Do you think America needs all these dental schools? And do you think that might get a lot more malpractice claims down the road just because of the perfect storm, maybe, many variables?
Well, it's very possible. And here's what's happening. I know I always admire you, Howard, for being on top of things, and you probably noticed that you probably get that, the huddle thing that the ADA sends out every morning. A couple days ago, there was a thing from U.S. News and World Report reporting that orthodontics is one of the number one professions, desirable professions. And I think general dentist was 2 or 3 on the list. And the idea was, dentistry is nice to go into. And then the second thing was, what is the top income profession? And I was happy to see it because my son's one is an anesthesiologist. An orthodontist was oral surgeon was like number 3. So there's all these things out there in chatter saying, these are great professions to go into. They don't say anything about the debt it takes to get there, but there's all this thing about, this is so appealing. Well, all these people that are in dental schools or in private entities see the bandwagon. Utah's had a glut of dentists for years and years, which I keep stats. And, what'll happen is the ADA will do surveys and say, when do you plan to retire? Well, what do most people say? I'm going to retire when I'm 65. Well, so the ADA takes that and says, okay, in Utah, there's 41 dentists a year. They're going to turn 40 or 65. The baby boomers are all going to retire at once. There's going to be a big shortage of Utah dentists. So they get on this, and there's all this worry and hubbub. And that's why Roseman, the private dental school we have in South Jordan, formed, because their people said, there's going to be a real shortage of dentists. We're going to be able to fulfill a need. There's all these kids that are going to become dentists. Well, in the meantime, for years and years and years, the University of Utah has had people trying to get a dental school going. And they had a $30 million grant they got from a family, I think it was, not Intel, it was one of the big computer companies. So they had this $30 million just waiting to use to buy a building. So they had motivation. And Roseman's going strong, and they graduated their first class. So we're cranking out dentists right and left, just like you are in Arizona. 2008 hits, boom. So yes, it is a concern that you're getting these poor younger dentists who've got $3,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 a month they've got to take home just to cover their student debt plus everything else. And so I think there is a concern about trying to do too much. Now, we haven't seen a lot of claims. What I'm seeing more are these senior dentists calling me saying, I had to fire this associate. They're not trained well enough. They don't know what they're doing. And then these poor associates trying to find another location and another place. And there's only so much to go around. And, of course, cosmetic dentistry was big for a while, but then the patients can't afford it. We're still suffering the effects of 2008, I think, here. And you know how things went in Arizona. You had these mass bankruptcies and just this real problem for a lot of this influx that you had. And so I think it is a concern. And, communities, there are people moving in. That was another thing about Utah. They said, the economy's good. You got a lot of people moving in. There is going to be a need. But the average Utah dentist is 70 when they retire, not 65. And I've got plenty that are in their 80s when they retire. There's not too many that are in their late 50s. And even, if they're still working away, they're taking away patients potentially from these younger dentists. And we're not a placement agency. I don't try to keep track and say, so-and-so's selling their practice. I try to keep my eyes and ears open. But it is a little bit of a worry. And I hear this more from some of these 50, 55-year-old dentists saying, man, these young kids, I'm getting all these people coming in with treatment plans saying they need 20 fillings where I can't even see that many. And so, I think over-treatment is a possible concern. And Where do you go? What do you do about it? It's hard. And compound that to the fact that they may not be trained as well. I mean, I see that in the residency. They don't know how to take teeth out. They don't know how to make dentures. Some of these schools, I think, are training their dental students to pass the boards, so they focus on those procedures that they need to pass the boards. But, you know, there's still plenty of people that need dentures. There's still plenty of people that need partial dentures. There's still plenty of people that can't afford implants. There's people, for medical reasons, can't have implants. So it's sort of back to some of these old things. And it's interesting, you know, everybody likes to do composite resin, and of course, insurance companies will pay for those to be redone every 5 years. But 20 years ago when we were in school, if you'd said, well, maybe this amalgam will last 5 years, I'm not sure, there'd be a big hue and cry, you're kidding. You can't do anything better than that? So there's a lot of interesting factors going on in dentistry today.
I think the aesthetic health compromise of going from all amalgams that lasted probably 38 years to all plastic inert composites that probably last 6.5 years has been a real step back. This country really paid a price to have tooth-colored fillings.
Well, you know, I wish they could come up with a material that had the bonding abilities and kind of the longevity and strength of amalgam. I mean, it's interesting. I was at a faculty meeting the other night and was talking about amalgam, and two people at the table jumped all over me saying, oh, amalgam's terrible. It splits teeth. He said, well, sure, if you've got a terribly wide prep that's overdone, but composites, you know, leak and wear out. You know, you don't use rubber dam, blah, 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 blah. I mean, but like you say, it is interesting where, you know, kind of the philosophy's changed, and, you know, we do need some better restorations. I mean, you know, metal's not pretty. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes mercury in the water, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, we're still working on better alternatives.
But it seems like so many dentists, though, just have zero respect for literature. I mean, you know, the literature says, okay, they're averaging 38 years. And then literature on composites, 6.5. And they immediately go to, well, not mine, if they're done right. And I come back and say, well, what do you think will last longer, the metal fork in your kitchen drawer or the plastic one from Kentucky Fried Chicken?
Sure.
And the metal fork is made out of 5 ingredients that kill bacteria: silver, zinc, copper, mercury, tin, and the other one's an inert plastic fork. But I don't want to digress on that. I'm going to go back to logistics. So you do the majority of dentists in Utah. Do you also do the dental students in the 2 dental schools? Do you insure those guys? What's that like?
They're in a different realm and a different classification. Most dental schools have these blanket, large, kind of corporate type policies that will cover the faculty as well as the dental students. The residency program's the same way. They have the University of Utah has a complete risk management department that handles any problems with the medical residents as well as the dental residents. It's rare that we have problems in dentistry. Occasionally, somebody will get a paresthesia, and for years, we attendings had to have private insurance. I've kept my P.I.E. insurance to be an attending up there, but with the advent of the dental school, they did away with that. But yeah, so I don't insure any of the dental schools. Some of the faculty, if they strictly work in the school, the school will cover them. If they work outside at all, then they need private coverage, and we do have a sort of a discounted rate for them if they're only working 1 day a week. So I think there's companies that kind of specialize in providing that kind of coverage for dental schools and faculty.
And I was also wondering if you could think about a win-win situation. I've been hearing a lot of women telling me they, you know, to learn hands-on implants. You know, the courses are in, Mexico, Dominican Republic, Brazil, and they don't feel safe. And a lot of those people won't have courses in America because of the lawyers. You're licensed for the state of Arizona. You can't go to another state and do a hands-on surgery. But we were able to, in Arizona, they have a homeless shelter just for vets. And the dentist there, who's my idol, went to the state board and said, can I have hands-on implant surgery courses here at the Cass Institute? It's Chris Volchek. And licensed dentists from other states can come here to do volunteer dentistry on the vets. They're doing volunteer dentistry only on the vets in a homeless shelter, and they have the license to practice dentistry. And I just think if a lot of states start doing that, then a lot of these American dentists who want hands-on training don't have to go, 1,000 miles away into a foreign country where they may be scared. And I imagine I was wondering if you could think about that and maybe talk to your state board. I'm sure you're have the state board on your speed dial.
Well, I'll tell you, we already have an entity called the Whitecap Institute up in Heber City where dentists come from all over the country and learn to do implants. In fact, we send our residents from the university. I keep pointing at anyway, they go up there. So they're already, that's a Utah or a nationally, I think, recognized entity right here that provides a course that can help people get good at implants. Now, speaking of that, let me put my glasses on. The Pierre Fourier Academy, if I can reach the little paper I have, is just, I'll just show you. I just got a sheet from them where they've got a program where they are looking at having Pierre Fourier Academy members agree to see veterans for either a limited or no fee to help them with things like implants and that sort of thing. If you wanted me to, I could scan and email this to you just so you can see. This is one of the things.
I would love it. And on that note, explain the Pierre Fourier Academy. A lot of the young kids in school aren't familiar with it.
Well,
talk about that.
Well, and again, it's kind of an interesting thing because, the millennials and Gen Xers, I'm not as sure, are as interested in some of these kind of old traditional type things. And you may not remember, we met in the good old AGD days when you either got your I think when you got your fellowship certificate, I was the one who handed you your fellowship certificate because I was the regional director at the time, okay?
That's right.
So the idea is you can gain honors and experience by taking CE courses and be rewarded by getting your fellowship. Well, the Pierre Fourier Academy is an honor organization where you're nominated to be a member based on your leadership in organized dentistry or humanitarian. If you haven't been nominated, Howard, you should be a member because of what you're doing. I mean, in Arizona, it would have to be, I nominate you in a second, but it'd have to be somebody in Arizona. Because I think what you're doing for Dentaltown, example, is something that gets dentists together, gets dentists communicating, and is a good thing. See, so there's various things. You usually have to be practicing for 5 years to be nominated at the Pierre Fourier Academy. And then we have various scholarships. We have a foundation, and through the foundation, grants can be given for various humanitarian efforts, either in the United States or in Mexico, places like that. So the idea is to reward people for being ethical leaders in the dental profession and provide a vehicle for them to go on and do humanitarian projects and things. And it's an international organization, so it's a way to meet dentists from Japan or whatnot. In my younger days, when I'd go to the ADA meeting and whatnot, it was fun. I still speak Japanese, so it was fun to kind of meet some of these people and talk to them. There's other organizations, the International College, the American College. It's the same thing. You're nominated based on your leadership. With all the stuff I did in AGD, being a trustee and whatnot, that's how I got involved. But it's fun. It's just one more thing to do. It doesn't take a huge amount of time, but it's fun to facilitate these opportunities.
And tell them about Pierre Fourier. He was the, who would you call the G.V. Black would be the father of American dentistry, but a couple hundred years before that was Pierre Fourier in France. So he was basically the first physician who wanted to just focus on the oral cavity?
Well, that's correct. I mean, back in the good old days, being a physician was almost self-trained, and there was a lot of charlatan, quackery, the whole thing. And Pierre Fourier was considered the father of modern dentistry. I mean, he was born in like 1678, so it was many, many years ago. But there weren't any useful books or anything, and he tried to create a mechanism for learning and for treating things medically and logically rather than just, old wives stuff, voodoo, and went on, took some training, and got a reputation as being a skilled practitioner in Paris, and he lived a long time. I mean, he died, he was almost, I think he was in his early 80s, which is long for that, but he wrote a book sort of on ways to do dentistry, which sort of became one of the Bibles and basic early things. And so that's where he came from, and that's where his name, I guess, to honor what he tried to do back in those good old days. But yeah, he, G.B. Black, who was the one, the one on nitrous oxide. There's a few of these just classic people. I mean, in modern days, we talk about, Dugoni and people like that. I think, Howard, with what you're doing with Dentaltown, which I think is great, getting young guys, you'll be remembered probably in a good way,
I just want to be remembered as the oldest dentist to ever live. That's all I want to be remembered.
Well,
I want to say, can you believe that guy lived that long? But yeah, he was Pierre Fourier was born in 1678, and Sir Isaac Newton's book Principles of Mathematica was 1687. So he's about the same time as Newton.
Yeah.
That they would have been the same age.
Yes. Well, and then the Pierre Fourier Academy was founded by this guy. I think Elmer Best was his name. And the idea was was
that back in France, or was he an American?
American. It was in America, and then the foundation was established in 1986. But the idea again was just to set up an organization where people could be honored for ethics. I'm just trying to look at the date when it was set up. I know you'd asked me about that, but it was, I think, in the either late 50s, early 60s. But yeah, the idea is just to provide a vehicle to recognize dentists for trying to be ethical, and also create a vehicle where these humanitarian efforts could be funded a little bit. So people
Now, his book was written in French. Did you ever read an English version of that book, or is there an English version?
No, I haven't seen it. I actually lived in France for a year when I was a kid and spoke French like a native till we came back to America, and then I didn't use it, forgot it. But I've never seen a translation. I'm sure, there were editions. The English translation was done in 1946, so there is one. I imagine it'd be interesting to see. That kind of might be something fun to read.
Yeah, I'm still kicking myself because like 20 years ago, some dentist from Kentucky called me up and he offered me the first 3 books ever written by G.V. Black, autographed and signed by him, and he wanted more money than imaginable. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to get them. So I got them, and then about 5 years later, someone offered me an original of Pierre Fourier's book, but he wanted a boatload of money for it. And I thought of it. So then when I finally decided, no, I do want that book. Now I can't find it. Yeah. So, but anyway,
do you know Eric Curtis in your state there?
Yeah, he was the editor of our Inscriptions magazine in Safford, Arizona.
He is a real aficionado of dental history stuff, and he might have access to some of those things. You may ought to get in touch with him, because he is a huge history guy. He wrote the history of UOP, for example. Of course, he's a superb writer. He has a feel for history, and he might have access to some of these things. That book you're talking about. He's just a contact you might want to check with.
Yeah, I should. And, it's funny you just said his name. We're talking about history, talking about Eric Curtis, because last weekend, to get away, I drove down to Tombstone, Arizona, where the most famous dentist in America lived, Doc Holliday.
Doc Holliday.
And that's right by Eric Curtis down there in Safford, Arizona. But I actually took a picture of myself standing at a row of people that were shot down and killed on the OK Corral by Doc Holliday, the dentist. So imagine, you think you'll ever get a malpractice claim in Utah where a dentist mows down 5 people in a bar fight?
No, but we had one where this dentist suspected his wife having an affair, and so he got home, when the guy, they were just talking on the couch, but he got so mad, he stabbed the guy. And so the wife runs out to their SUV to take the guy to the hospital, and the dentist jumps on the hood, holding on to the windshield wipers while she's trying to, knock him off. I mean, it would have made a bad grade B movie about dentists. But that's the closest thing we've had in Utah. And, of course, he got hauled into jail and blah, blah, blah. A few interesting tales of near murder by dentists, but the patient or the gigolo lived, and I don't know what happened to the marriage, but that's as close as I can give you there. But no, if you haven't, Eric would probably be an interesting interview for you sometime.
Yeah, well, I'll do that. And what's the web? So the Pierre Fourier Academy is Fauchard.org, FAUCHARD.org.
Yes.
And how many members do you have?
Oh, in Utah, we've got about 95 active. Then a lot of people, when they get retirement age, will become life members. we have an annual meeting every year in conjunction with the UDA meeting. We probably get 50, 60% of them come. We kind of kick off the meeting, and there's a large number of them are involved in humanitarian projects, and they'll tell about it, and people will be interested and sign up, and that's one of the vehicles we have. And we've been involved with a scholarship with at the time, the RDEP program, which was a sort of a precursor to the dental school. So those are some of the things we do. Everybody's busy. We don't try to put on any CE courses or anything. I did do an ethics lecture sort of sponsored by Pierre Fourier a few years ago, but those are the kind of things we do. The American College really pushes ethics. The International College is also involved kind of in international leadership and sort of bringing various dentists together and sort of trying to help the quality of dentistry. The American Academy of Dentistry International is another one, and they sort of try to improve the quality of dental care in countries like Vietnam and places where they're just sort of trying to develop. So there's a lot of these various organizations like that. But yeah, and I suspect you'll have a fairly large Pierre Fourier Academy section there in Arizona.
And who was the founder? It's Elmer S. Best.
Yes,
Where was he from?
I think back east somewhere. I'm sorry.
I guess my walnut brain would have figured that the Pierre Fourier Academy was started in Paris, France. I don't know why I would just logically.
That would be a natural thought, but no, it was basically, I think, started here with the idea of let's push the image of quality and such that Pierre Fourier tried to do in dentistry, and then making it worldwide. Obviously, U.S. and Canada probably lead out in a lot of ways in dentistry, and the idea, I think, too, is just bringing dentists together, kind of like what you try to do with Dentaltown, just get people communicating and talking amongst themselves, trying to make things better.
Well, I'll give you this piece of advice to you young listeners out there. When you view the dentist in the same medical dental building with you or across the street from you as your competition, and you practice that way your whole life, you are twice as unhappy and unfulfilled. I've noticed that all the dentists who have 3 or 4 dentist friends in the same zip code, same city, and every Thursday they go eat lunch at the bowling alley, whatever, their 30-year career or 40-year career is so much more fun and rewarding. I mean, I've been in this one zip code forever. I mean, most of the second opinions I do of an upset patient from one of my friends in my zip code, I just say, I'll tell you what, I'll just fix it free right now. And I'll do the whole damn thing for free. I've redone bridges, implant, everything. And I usually don't even tell my buddy because I don't want him to feel bad or whatever. And then 3 months later, they'll call you up and say, "Are you kidding me? You blah, blah, blah." And so if it's the Pierre Fourier Academy, if it's your local study club, your competition is Disneyland and TVs and cell phones. And those homies across the street from you, them are your colleagues. Them are your friends. And and whatever you can do, and another thing is the more closer relationships you have with them, they'll keep you out of trouble too. They'll be telling you at lunch, I don't think you should do that. Or why don't we go ask the oral surgeon? Or why don't we go talk to the periodontist or whatever? But I really love all these different communities in dentistry. I think they really help dentists get through the hardest thing they're ever going to do is their dental profession. It's a tough profession.
Well, that's what I had. Same thing. I mean, I came in a building fresh, starting a practice from scratch in 1981. There were 2 dentists on either side of me. And instead of the attitude of, oh, gee, that's all we need, one more guy in this building. Oh, man. Oh, no. We kind of, the one took me to lunch, like you say, and told me I need to get involved in the Dental Association. And these are the best insurance companies to sign up with, da-da-da-da-da. We agreed to cover for each other. Did the same thing with the one on the other side, and it worked out great. And I'd have a question, I'd go talk to him. He'd have patients he didn't like. He would send them to me, and I was happy to take them. He sent me root canal cases, and the other one started sending me root canal cases. And don't get me wrong, I knew what I was doing and didn't take on, I referred to the endodontist if I didn't want to take the case, so they didn't get mad at me. But the whole thing was his communication. I mean, he was my mentor. I mean, and the irony, then, after a few years, he'd come asking me questions about things, because with my residency training and whatnot, I was on top. He'd refer me patients that needed to, go to the hospital or whatever, because I did that. So you're absolutely right. Any way of sort of having this idea of collegiality instead of competition, that's the professionalism rather than the trade business, I think.
And I think Dentaltown was so successful because they could do that with a dentist in another state far, far away. I can be your friend because I'm in Utah and you're in Washington. But they need to forget the website. They need to put down the cell phone and be a friend in the flesh with the guy in the same building. Most dental offices, medical dental buildings I go into, I'll walk in there and I'll see like there's 6 dentists. I'll say, when's the last time you went to lunch with any of these dentists? And 90% of the dentists will say, well, I've never had lunch with any of those dentists ever. And
Well,
are you not right in the head?
Let me tell you, you've hit something else that creates claims, and that is a patient will come in and a dentist will take x-rays or whatever and just say, oh, who did this work? This is terrible. I need to redo all this. Is, criticizing without knowing all the facts. I mean, if there's a question, you call the prior dentist and say, hey, I just had somebody come in. They said this crown was done 6 months ago. It looks, and then usually they say, it wasn't done 6 months ago. It was done 6 years ago, and the guy never paid his bill. I mean, and then, that's one of the things we preach all the time is don't criticize a dentist without all the facts. Call them up, talk to them, find out what really happened. Patients are good at fabricating and saying anything to get money.
And last, we're out of time. We already went over an hour. And last but not least, it also, I think it's insane of how many of these young kids will fly to a different state to take a course when they could have walked over to the periodontist, the oral surgeon, the orthodontist, and said, hey, Friday, can I just come in and observe? I want to learn about gum surgery. I want to learn about bone grafting. And that periodontist right up the street, he wants a friend.
Sure.
So why did you fly? So why did you get on Southwest Airlines and fly 1,000 miles and pay $4,000 when there's a guy in your zip code that would have spent the whole damn day with you?
Oh yeah, right on. That's absolutely right. Very good.
All right, well, Richard, thank you so much for spending an hour with me. This was so informative on malpractice, the Pierre Fourier words of wisdom, and good luck to you, buddy. And I can't wait to see you again. And thank you for handing me my fellowship in the Academy of General Dentistry.
It was my pleasure. You earned it. And once in a while, I get down to Phoenix for things. I'll come by your office and say hello.